First up is how to turn your Tav into a vampire in Baldur's Gate 3. This permanent transformation grants you the class action Vampire Bite. Suck the blood from a living creature to regain hit points. This deals 2d4 piercing damage, but not if the target is sleeping or if you are hiding when it is used. Also, after using Vampire Bite, you get the condition Happy. This amazing condition grants +1 to all attack rolls, saving throws, and most ability checks. It's actually funny, the tooltip says Astarion's vampiric hunger has been temporarily sated, even if it's your Tav who has the condition. It just shows how rare becoming a vampire must be. Now, this condition lasts until long rest, which is amazing, and your target will become bloodless until long rest, which grants -1 to attack rolls, saving throws, and most ability checks. And like Astarion's hidden undead bonuses, you'll gain those too. For example, Spell Rot, which affects characters in the Ancient Layer, causes you to take 2d6 necrotic damage anytime you cast a spell per spell level while you have the condition. That is unless you are undead, in which case it won't even appear as a condition. This never afflicted Astarion, and once you become a vampire, it will no longer afflict you. Things like Undead Ward Aura, which grant resistances to allied undead, never actually worked on Astarion, so they will not work on your vampire Tav. And the only way to become a vampire is actually to romance Astarion. Help him become a vampire ascendant and then have him turn you into a vampire. So if you want to become a vampire, you need to be ready to become Astarion's little juice box. Now, this process is actually not very easy. There are a number of pitfalls to avoid while trying to romance Astarion, and you need to make sure to long rest often so as not to miss any key dialogue which advances the romance. In Act 1, you'll need to increase Astarion's approval of you through things like declining to help people, helping Lae'zel interrogate Zorru in the Grove, baaing at the sheep or the redcaps in the sunlit wetlands, acquiring Leviatar's love in the Shattered Sanctum, giving him the necromancy of Thay, walking in on the bugbear and the ogre in the barn at the Blighted Village, and generally asking for compensation if you do end up helping people. Doing these things will increase your approval with Astarion enough that at the end of the Act 1 celebration, you can spend the night with him. After that, in Act 2, you'll need to make sure to talk to Araj Abludra and stand up for Astarion, letting him make his own decision to not drink Araj's blood and long rest after that encounter. Later on, when you encounter Raphael outside the Grand Mausoleum, you'll need to accept and complete the bargain with Raphael to learn what the scars are on Astarion's back. Long rest after defeating Yurgir and fulfilling your end of the bargain, and this long rest is critical in order to progress the dialogue with Astarion to be able to kiss him and ask about the relationship. Even though Astarion is dismissive, this is as far as the romance can go in Act 2. But if you miss this long rest dialogue, you won't be able to romance Astarion further in Act 3, and you'll actually get some pretty harsh dialogue, so make sure to long rest before the end of Act 2. Then in Act 3, you can head straight for the Szarr Palace and Cazador's dungeon. Make sure to avoid talking to the other spawn, as it can actually make Astarion change his mind about trying to ascend. And then finally, after you defeat Cazador and help Astarion ascend, long rest and you'll gain the dialogue with Astarion asking for him to make you a vampire. The next morning, you'll be a vampire with Vampire Bite and all the benefits of being a vampire Astarion had before he ascended, which is pretty awesome. And next up is a secret Astarion scene everyone missed. In Act 3, during a long rest, Astarion's fellow spawn will appear in the camp attempting to kidnap him and bring him back to Cazador. These spawn are weak and easily defeated, which is why this scene is so rare. If you actually let them take Astarion. If you let them down him, they'll kidnap him, instantly bringing him to the Szarr Palace. After he's gone, you can slay the other spawn, at which point your Tav will have some actually really rare dialogue saying, it's best to just rest, there's no point in going after vampires at night. Once you head to bed, you'll immediately trigger a rare cutscene with Godi and Astarion. Let's watch it.
A familiar stink fills your nostrils. You're back in the kennel, where you spent 10 days being tortured by Cazador's sadistic servant Godi.
Nasty little runaway. But you always find your way back to Godi. If I had my way, I'd saw off your legs. That'd put a stop to your wandering. But the master says no. Says he needs all of your blood on the inside for the mass. But he needs you obedient too. No bucking, no biting, no struggling. A well-behaved little doggy. You think you're free? Then let's tighten your chain.
All that you've seen since the crash, all the wonders and horrors suddenly seem inconsequential. Only one thing matters. Cazador, your master, your lord, your creator. His will tightens around you once again, and it is as if you never escaped him.
And then finally, you're going to be faced with a saving throw, and even if you fail the saving throw, your tadpole will come to your rescue and shatter your bond, letting you battle Godi, which isn't too hard of a fight. And next up is the rarest pet I've ever seen. This pet is a sheep named Harvard Willoughby, which you can hatch out of a mysterious egg, and this isn't from any mod. The pet sheep comes equipped with Call Lightning, Entangle, Thorn Whip, and Wall of Thorns. Unlike most summons though, your pet sheep can also use consumables such as scrolls and potions. Most notably as well is the fact that the sheep is immune to fire damage, and immediately upon entering combat, it lights itself on fire. No joke. Not only that, but the sheep also apparently randomly explodes like a fireball at the start of its turn and actually deals 8d6 fire damage, which is the same amount of damage as a regular fireball spell. It took many turns to get this to happen, so exploding is a pretty rare occurrence, but the sheep is very much dead if it does happen, despite being immune to fire damage. The sheep even has a name, Harvard Willoughby. And if you're a learned Baldur's Gate 3 player, you know that there's a comedian in the Elfsong Tavern by that exact same name. And that is actually the first step in summoning this pet sheep. You need to first kill the human Harvard Willoughby, for surely the sheep of the same name cannot exist while the human still lives. Then you'll need to ring the bell at the top of the Lower City Central Wall Waypoint Tower and at the Open Hand Temple. The order doesn't matter, just make sure to ring both of them to begin the process of turning Harvard into a sheep. Once both bells have been rung, go to your Rivington campsite, and in the area behind Gale's tent, you'll find a mysterious egg. Click on it, and you'll now have your own pet sheep, Harvard Willoughby. Now, considering the incredibly specific and seemingly random series of actions needed to take to summon this pet, I'd wager that this is probably one of the rarest secret NPCs in the entire game. And next up is literally the rarest item in the entire game. This item is so difficult to find, I'm sure nearly everybody missed it. This item is the Oil of Freezing. So why is this oil so rare? Well, the only way to get it is to craft it by gathering 3 frost salamander tongues. Now, you've probably never even heard of a frost salamander tongue. The tongues themselves are incredibly hard to find, and needing 3 of them to make this oil is really why this is so impossibly rare. Frost salamander tongues can be bought from certain traders, however, they don't appear on any of the treasure or drop tables on the BG3 wiki, and I couldn't find any information online about which trader table they are part of. However, players have said online that Cloud Giant Fingers can be bought off Dareth Bonecloak, so I figured so could Frost Salamander Tongues. After nearly 20 minutes of constantly changing my class and leveling up in order to refresh Dareth's stock, I was able to find 1 single Frost Salamander Tongue. Players also claim to have found Frost Salamander Tongues from Helsik in the Devil's Fee and in the Offerings to Mistress chest beneath the Stormshore Tabernacle, both within Act 3. However, as I was refreshing Dareth's stock, I was also refreshing Helsik's, and I didn't find it after those 20 minutes, so this is super rare apparently. Also, I saved and reloaded 30 times checking Mistress Offering chest and never once saw a Frost Salamander Tongue, so yet another, in my opinion, impossibly rare location that you could possibly get them. However, there is a guaranteed way to get a single Frost Salamander Tongue, which lies within the Alchemist's stash in Act 2. If you find the note in the back room of the Waning Moon, you can have your map marked with this Alchemist stash, but if you already know the location, then you don't need to bother with that. Located just south of the House of Healing, near the road to Baldur's Gate, there is a dirt mound. All of my characters failed the survival check, but you can still manually dig with the shovel and get yourself a single Frost Salamander Tongue, guaranteed. But the other 2 will likely need to be bought, and that requires requires a dedicated amount of time refreshing traders' stock, which I doubt many players did unless specifically searching for frost salamander tongues, which means probably nearly everybody missed this oil. And if you go through all that effort for the oil, you might be wondering, is it even any good? Well, this oil can be used to coat your weapon to cause 2 turns of encrusted with frost, causing disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. It is worth noting that there is no save on applying the encrusted with frost condition. It happens with every hit, which is nice. With 7 or more turns of encrusted with frost, the target takes 1d4 cold damage and becomes frozen unless they succeed a DC 12 Constitution save. If they succeed, they only take half damage. The coating lasts 10 turns, which is depressing considering how difficult it is to even make the oil. So even in a dedicated encrusted with frost build, there's no way going out of your way to make this oil make sense considering it only lasts 10 turns. And for that additional reason, I think this item will remain probably one of the rarest items in the entire game. And next up is how to unlock hidden dialogue where Bhaal will actually speak through his avatar. In Act 3 within the Temple of Bhaal, you can sneak around Orin to enter the Chosen's room. Within there, you can find Helena, Orin's mother. If you cast Speak with Dead on her, you can discover that she was ordered by Saravak to kill Orin, her own daughter. You'll also learn that Orin instead killed her, and with this knowledge, when you confront Orin, you can select the dialogue option telling her that Saravak ordered her mother to kill her, which can begin to enrage her. If you then pass either a deception or religion check, you'll then have Orin break down, and Bhaal will actually intervene through the avatar of Bhaal and actually speak. He will sort of reassure her and then force her to transform into Slayer form. Orin will then have a new powerful condition called a Mist Most Scarlet, which grants 25 temporary hit points, a +2 bonus to strength, and advantage on wisdom saving throws. Orin already has 25 strength, so the +2 bonus to strength brings her up to 27. So while this dialogue chain is pretty hidden, you probably don't want to go down this path unless you just want to experience it, because this ends up making Orin even stronger. And since going around the hidden path and choosing these exact dialogue options is the only way to trigger this condition, it's probably something that most players missed. And next up is how to keep Power Word Kill permanently. Usually this spell is a one-time use, which is fair considering this incredibly powerful spell instantly slays any target as long as they have 100 or fewer health points remaining. Absolutely amazing. This level 9 enchantment spell is earned by playing as the Dark Urge and embracing your urge in Act 3. However, to keep this spell permanently and use it over and over as many times as you'd like, you'll need to either be an enchantment wizard or a sorcerer with twinned spell. Now the reason for this is because if you cast Power Word Kill on yourself, the spell doesn't get removed, probably because you're dead and some trigger doesn't activate. So by always using it on yourself and another target, you will always keep this spell. This gives the spell new life as a sort of if I die, I'm taking you with me type functionality, which is really cool. Twinned spell on sorcerer will cost you 9 sorcery points, but with the Shield of the Devout or Undevout, you can get infinite sorcery points. Or even better, as a level 10 enchantment wizard, you get Split Enchantment, allowing you to always choose 2 targets for your enchantment spells passively without any cost. And Power Word Kill is an enchantment spell. So either way, it's an incredibly powerful spell that you can keep permanently if you're a sorcerer or a wizard and cast it on yourself every single time. And next up is the secret portal in the House of Hope. Within Raphael's secret locked vault, you can find the Helldusk Helm, Staff of Spell Power, and Maul's Contract. But did you know above the portrait on the wall, there is a portal? Now it's not to be confused with the outer portal room, which supposedly leads to places like Neverwinter and Waterdeep. This portal is simply called Portal. And unfortunately, it is out of reach and there are no boxes in the House of Hope to stack. But if you leave the House of Hope and bring boxes back with you, you can actually stack them to try and get closer to the portal. Now, users have had different experiences, some leading to loading screens and then game crashes, but as of patch 7, even if you are right next to the portal on top of stacked boxes, it will still tell you that you are out of reach of the portal. So for now, this portal will remain a mystery, but it's one more thing to keep an eye on, perhaps becoming something that we can interact with in patch 8. And next up is how to get more than 5 questions from Speak with Dead. This isn't a bug or an exploit. There's actually one NPC who just won't stop talking even in death. And that NPC is Neighbor. Neighbor is an NPC you can find inside Karm's Garm within Worm's Crossing. He wants to be an adventurer and is trying to decide which class he wants to be. And he has an incredible amount of dialogue. You can actually talk to him him about being every single class, and you'll be rewarded for listening to him that long even. However, if you use Speak with Dead on his corpse, he's somehow still as talkative, and you can ask him more than 5 questions because he refuses to be quiet. There's even a dialogue option during Speak with Dead asking Neighbor how to make this stop, but eventually you do run out of dialogue options and you can select leave, at which point the narrator comments that his body longs to rest, but his spirit doesn't stop talking, even as he returns to what we can only hope are, and I quote, the deepest depths of the hells. And next up is hidden Shadowheart dialogue 100% of players missed. If you have Shadowheart in your party and head to the graveyard in Act 3, you can click on a tombstone near the south entrance and Shadowheart will say, "Odd, I can't help but feel a twinge of sorrow at this grave." But why? Who is this? She'll then have an exclamation mark over her head where you can then talk to her and discover that Alistair Marnley, the man whose grave triggered this dialogue, had actually trained Shadowheart in the arts of stealing, following people, and other Sharran arts. And like a true Sharran, he took his secrets to the grave. But what most people probably didn't know is that if you have Shadowheart drop a night orchid on top of Alistair Marnley's grave, she'll actually have something additional to say. She says, "My favorite flower, just a small remembrance from one who can scarcely remember. Rest well." And next up is the mysterious elixir found within the Chamberlain office suite in the Szarr Palace. If you pass a perception check when entering the Chamberlain bedroom, you can find the diary of Antwin Dufay. The final page reads that Bonecloak had sold Antwin a potion that is promised to provide him a convincing illusion of death, and he plans to leave behind a lookalike potion of acid poison so that when his body is found, he will be presumed dead. However, if we go into his office, we can find within the wooden desk that the mysterious elixir is still there and full, and there's actually an empty potion bottle on a small table near his corpse. We can only assume that he must have mixed up the two and actually drank the poison, leading to his death. And then we can take the mysterious elixir for ourselves, letting us cast Feign Death whenever we'd like without the cost of a spell slot, action, or bonus action, and it's kind of a neat story behind it too. And next up is the Trumpet of Sparkles. This is probably missed by most players because the only way to see it is if you free Valeria from her chains after agreeing to slay her. Once you do, she will remain hostile towards you and will attack you repeatedly, eventually using her Trumpet of Sparkles on you. Trumpet of Sparkles deals 4 to 32 radiant damage in a cone AoE in front of Valeria and has a very cool looking effect that only deals damage to evil creatures, which also have disadvantage on the saving throw against it. Since Valeria has such a small health pool, most players would probably either one-shot her, and she also has restrained, so she doesn't get a turn anyways if you fail to kill her in one hit. So it's very rare to agree to slay Valeria and then immediately free her and then have to fight not only Valeria but also Saravak. But as a plus, you do get to witness Valeria use her Trumpet of Sparkles. And next up is how to shop from the Echo of Abazigal, who sells some of the best equipment in the game without becoming an unholy assassin of Bhaal. Becoming an assassin breaks your paladin oath and involves slaying Valeria, so if you've ever wanted Valeria as an ally in the final fight but still wanted Abazigal's amazing items, here's how to do it. You'll need one character with expertise and proficiency in sleight of hand, and try to increase your sleight of hand as much as possible from items such as the Unlucky Thief's Gloves and the Smuggler's Ring, as well as give yourself advantage on sleight of hand checks through the Graceful Cloth. You'll also need to be able to cast Fog. Once you're ready, head to the Ballast Crypt beneath Kendall Hollow's tombstones, ungroup your party, and send your dialogue character. And you'll want to progress as if you wanted to become an unholy assassin of Bhaal, and once the Spirit of the Slain is summoned, switch over to your sleight of hand character. Send that character right up next to the summoned spirit, cast Fog, and make sure it only hits your sleight of hand character. Then go ahead and enter stealth mode and pickpocket the summoned spirit. Now, amazingly, this spirit has all of the items that the Echo of Abazigal would have. So you can pickpocket every single item you wanted to purchase right now before you ever become an assassin of Bhaal, letting you change your mind after you've pickpocketed the items if you want to. However, if you fail even one pickpocket roll, you'll immediately begin combat with Saravak and his echoes, losing any remaining items you might have wanted from Abazigal permanently unless you load a save. So make sure to have a halfling hireling do this pickpocketing so you can't roll a critical fail if you really want a certain item on an honor run, such as the incredibly powerful Crater Flesh Gloves or Ballast Armor. And next up is Nebelun, the true face of Gond. Now, most players players probably haven't heard of Nebelun nor know why it's useful. Now, in the rare scenario where you either didn't save the Ironhand gnomes in Act 2, or you did save them and then slaughtered them, and you managed to get Xander Tubin killed, there is only one last way to destroy the Steelwatch Foundry. If you loot Xander Tubin's corpse, you'll find a book called Property of Xander Tubin. In this book are mathematical equations and other nonsense, but in the margin it is written that only Gond's true name can destroy the Neurocitor. From here, it's up to you to discover Gond's true name if you want to have any hope of destroying the Steelwatch Foundry. Luckily, the answer is within the Foundry itself. Near the surgery room in the Foundry, there are 4 bookshelves. On one, there's a book called The Many Faces of Gond. By reading that book, you'll discover that the Gondians call Gond Nebelun, and this unlocks new dialogue with the Neurocitor, allowing you to pass a DC 7 intelligence check to destroy the Foundry. An option most players probably miss, but if all else fails, Nebelun is the answer to destroy the Steelwatch Foundry forever. And next up is Hoots Hooch. This is an alcoholic beverage you can purchase from Hoots Hooligan in Shress's Caress in Act 3. This beverage is secretly filled with magical random effects, not the poisoned until long rest that it appears to be. There are 10 possible effects from this drink. You can get bad breath, which makes anyone who successfully attacks you in melee range nauseous, unable to take actions. However, it appears to be bugged, and the target loses nauseous immediately after getting it, making it useless. Beast Tongue is another possibility. This grants you the ability to talk to animals, but gives you disadvantage on charisma and animal handling checks against beasts. You can also just black out. You become unconscious, pretty self-explanatory. Blink allows you to blink between the material and ethereal plane in your drunken stupor. You can get Dancing Fool, which is essentially Otto's irresistible dance. You can't take actions or move, and enemies have advantage on attacks against you while you boogie. You can get Gifted. You can read minds but become vulnerable to psychic damage. There's Photosensitivity, becoming blind in direct sunlight but gaining superior dark vision. If the effects of photosensitivity wear off while you are still in the sunlight, then you will be permanently blinded until long rest. So another bug apparently with these drinks. There's also Size Instability. You enlarge and reduce each turn. I was drinking Hoots Hooch as fast as I possibly could, and when all the conditions faded away, for some reason this one just continued to keep enlarging me and reducing me, which lasted until long rest. It was actually kind of annoying and definitely not intended, so be warned, it can happen, certainly a bug. You can also become stoned. You become petrified for 2 turns, then receive Stone Skin for 10 turns, which grants resistance to non-magical slashing, bludgeoning, and piercing damage. And last but not least, there is Transformation. You become a bad little sheep. Most of the effects only last a few turns and aren't really amazing, but since it's random and the supply of Hoots Hooch is limited, most players probably didn't discover all the different effects that can happen from this barkeeper's new brew. And next up is how to fart your way to a new weapon. As a bard, you have the option to let out a huge fart when in dialogue with Akabi at the Circus of the Last Days. If you succeed, then you'll distract him and win the jackpot, letting you teleport to the jungle of Chult and acquire the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel and Nyrulna. This is an alternative to pickpocketing his ring from him to win the jackpot. The green smoke behind you as you let out your fart is hilarious, but it also begs the question, would Shart herself if she failed the roll to let out a huge fart? This had to be tested for science, so after failing the roll, Shart actually does not shart herself. Akabi just says shh and is not distracted by the fart. So no sharding, unfortunately. But very interesting that a bard doesn't need to steal the ring in order to win the jackpot. And next up, can you summon Vecna at the Murder Tribunal? Now, we all know that if you are playing as the Dark Urge and sever Gale's hand in Act 1 while he's trapped in the portal, then you can bring his hand to the Murder Tribunal in Act 3 and actually see his spirit summoned. So can the same be done for Vecna? In Act 3, within the Circus of the Last Days, you can actually win the other hand of Vecna as a consolation prize from Akabi the Genie. But who is Vecna? Well, Vecna was once a human king and lich who ascended to godhood. His hand was a powerful and evil artifact that granted its wearer access to supernatural strength and powerful spells. So Vecna's other hand is actually a joke that instead of that powerful evil artifact, you just got the useless hand. But if you take this hand over to the Murder Tribunal, could you actually summon the spirit spirit of Vecna. Well, I schlepped my Tav over there with the other hand of Vecna in tow, and very disappointingly, Vecna could not be summoned. And next up is how to unlock a secret trader. This secret trader actually sells an item that gives you a condition until long rest that makes you immune to Tasha's hideous laughter, and an item that is the equivalent of disguise self. This trader is Szarr the mummy in the Circus of the Last Days. If you talk to Szarr, she'll basically make some mumbling mummy noises, and you could pass an insight check to gain access to her wares, but you could also use detect thoughts and read Zara's mind to learn that she's trying to sell you face paint. However, you could also just select trade from the menu on the left and skip all of this, but it is neat to hear Zara's actual voice through detect thoughts. The rare face painting kit will grant you immunity to Tasha's hideous laughter through the clown face paint condition, and the disguise kit lets you disguise self once per stack of the item. It's pretty neat that these items exist, and most players probably miss them. And next up are some extremely rare items that most players miss: the Moon Devotion robes and Jonal's gloves. These items can be found on Isabel's body. Since most players probably don't slay Isabel, they probably end up missing these items. It is possible to acquire these items on a good playthrough though if you turn on non-lethal attacks in Act 3, carry her away from Dame Ayland, then knock her out and loot her. The Moon Devotion robes grant Produce Flame and Lunar Bulwark. Lunar Bulwark is mage armor essentially, but while having mage armor and wearing the robe, you'll deal 1d4 radiant damage to any target who you succeed a saving throw against. The robes also grant advantage on Constitution saving throws and saving throws +1. Not the best robes ever, but one that many players probably miss. I actually tested casting some spells on Shadowheart while she was wearing these robes, and it appears that the 1d4 radiant damage never triggered against me when she succeeded the saving throw, so it looks like these robes don't actually work, which I'm not too surprised about since most players probably don't even ever use them. As for Jonal's gloves, they automatically cast Lesser Restoration when the wearer becomes blinded, paralyzed, or poisoned. This actually sounds pretty cool since it basically means you're immune to those conditions at least once per long rest. However, after testing them, even after getting poisoned, Lae'zel did not self-cast Lesser Restoration like the gloves said she would, so these gloves also do not appear to be working as intended. The +1 to saving throws did appear in the combat log, however the attribution was blank. It was kind of just an open and closed parentheses, so I think that confirms that these gloves are also a bit buggy. And next up is how to get Yurgir to join you. Yurgir is an incredibly powerful ally to have. He can go invisible each turn as a bonus action and has two very useful abilities. The first is Concussive Burst, dealing 5 to 40 thunder damage and pushing enemies back, and his much more powerful ability, which is insane, Volatile Cluster, which tosses 3 bombs that knocks nearby creatures prone and will explode in a fiendish flame blast, dealing 28 to 202 damage. Now, it usually takes a few turns for the bombs to explode, but if you throw them directly into a fire surface, they will explode immediately. This makes Yurgir probably one of the strongest companions, on par with Supreme Commander Kithrak Voss, and the two of them actually work really great together. Throw his bombs into the fire for instant damage. And next up, can you cast Power Word Kill on yourself in a Globe of Invulnerability, survive, and then keep the spell? Now, if you saw my last video, we learned that we can keep Power Word Kill permanently by casting it both on ourselves and another target, which kills both of the targets, but you keep the spell to use again when it's otherwise a one-time use. So we should keep it if we do the same, but under a Globe of Invulnerability, right? I tested it out, and it looks like the Globe of Invulnerability will in fact keep us alive from this spell. However, we will lose the spell. Now, likely this is because we're still alive after casting the spell, and I think this points to the fact that the only reason we keep the spell when casting it on ourselves is because we are dead, and the trigger to remove it probably doesn't work on a target that's not alive. And next up is Harleep's new hidden vulnerability. In patch 7, Larian has updated protection from evil and good to now completely protect against Incubus Charm, which is used exclusively by Harleep. The spell requires concentration, but while it's on, Harleep cannot use Incubus Charm on anyone with this spell. This makes the Harleep fight extremely easy since your teammates being charmed was really one of the biggest threats. Clerics, warlocks, and wizards will all get the spell at level 1, paladins at level 2, and you can also get protection from evil and good from the Ever-Seeing Eye, which is an amulet in the Hag's Lair in Act 1, and of course you can also use the Scroll of It, which works just as well, but it is super helpful. Highly recommend you try it out. And next up is how to get the Gondian Steelwatcher to join you. This incredible machine has a number of powerful abilities, including abilities a normal Steelwatcher actually wouldn't have. The first of which is Reprimand, a literal uppercut which deals 9 to 30 bludgeoning damage that knocks targets prone. It also has Reposition Malefactor, which is a grappling hook that pulls enemies to you, which also deals 3d8 bludgeoning damage. And as a bonus action, it can use Seeker Matrix, which allows it to see invisible creatures and possibly reveal them to others. And in addition to all that, it also has its regular attack, which we all know and love, which deals 7 to 40 slashing damage and can knock a target prone and cause maim, which makes the target immobile for 2 turns. It also has the same health points as a typical Steelwatcher, and when that HP is reduced sufficiently, like your typical Steelwatcher, it will begin its self-destruct sequence, dealing massive damage upon completion. Now, to get the Gondian Steelwatcher under your command, you need to complete the quest Save the Gondians. However, based on my testing, you actually need to save all the Gondians. Now, if you don't save them all, Xander Tubin will actually be very happy that you saved those that you did, but will actually complain that there are so few of them that remain, and you actually won't have the Gondian Steelwatcher at your disposal in the final fight. So if you want to have it, you have to make sure to save them all. And next up is improved Lumbar support. In the patch 7 notes, Larian mentioned that Lumbar will now stand still after you paid him to hit him. Not knowing who Lumbar is or that you could pay him to hit him, I was intrigued. Right next to the Basilisk Gate waypoint in Act 3 is Lumbar, who is just lumbering around. And you can actually now see a citizen hitting him who must have just paid for his service. And Lumbar just rejuvenates himself, which makes sense after all, considering what he truly is. So if you talk to Lumbar and pay to hit him, I actually tested it, and he in fact will stay still after you pay to hit him. I never hit him prior to the patch, so I'm assuming he would have run away if you hit him pre-patch 7, but this new change is pretty neat. And next up is the Dead Eyes of Act 3. This is a criminal gang found in Act 3 who are residing in Old Garlow's place, but they only appear there if the hag was not killed in Act 1, hence there is no hag survivors group taking refuge in Old Garlow's place. Once you enter Old Garlow's, immediately combat begins with these bandits. There's no dialogue, but you can read some letters you can find on their corpses. The leader of the gang wrote a note about how the Dead Eyes are at odds with the guild, and a bloodied journal that has some rather bloodthirsty writing on it can also be found. And while there isn't much noteworthy loot to be had, the Dead Eyes gang is probably missed by quite a few players, considering they only appear if Auntie Ethel was never slain in Act 1. And next up is Boss Friol, the NPC most players miss. Boss Friol is the leader of the Zhentarim, and probably most players never see her. And that's because Boss Friol only appears if Roa Moonglow is slain during Act 1 or Act 2. If you do slay Roa Moonglow, then when you find the Stone Lord in the abandoned cistern, you'll see Friol for the first time in a cinematic where she is accepting payment to turn on the guild. Then later, when you return to the guild hall, you'll encounter Boss Friol once again, and you can choose to either side with her or the guild. And if you side with her when the Zhentarim are going to battle, you can later even talk to Boss Friol about her plans, and she'll even offer to join you in the final fight. And next up is a hidden dialogue that most players probably miss. Hidden within the Morphic Pool are the Drycelis sisters, 2 Dragonborn smugglers who are overwhelmed by intellect devourers. If you use Speak with Dead on Listelia, she will explain that the teddy bear that she carries belongs to her sister, and that they always take it with them when doing jobs since it's their good luck charm. If you then take the teddy bear from her corpse and bring it to her sister, who is also in the Morphic Pool behind a locked door, and put it on her corpse, you will actually unlock hidden dialogue between your party members and your Tav. I tested this, and Shadowheart will comment how they fought hard till the end, and Tav will say they didn't deserve this, and it's another reason to defeat the Netherbrain. And next up is the Orb of Infernal Visioning. This orb is found within the Devil's Fee in Act 3. By clicking on it the first time you encounter it, you can actually see Raphael looking at you, apparently seeing you through it as you look at him. But if you enter the House of Hope and slay Raphael and then return to the Orb of Infernal Visioning, you'll actually see something different. You'll see a broken and bloodied Raphael dangling above Mephistopheles, who is preparing to devour devour him. Now, this suggests that this orb truly does allow some form of sight into another very real realm, and it sheds light onto what possibly happens to Raphael after you defeat him. And next up are the secrets of the Szarr Palace, probably one of the most mysterious places in Baldur's Gate 3. There are so many secret areas, hidden loot, and unsolved puzzles within this palace. In the attic, you can find letters written by Amanita Szarr, the niece of Cazador, and how she learned about her family's history as vampires. In that same attic, you can also find a silver key, which unlocks a cellar door leading to the infamous dungeon, which previously had an unsolvable puzzle. After patch 5, now there's just a treasure chest containing treasure there. Also within Cazador's dungeon, you can find the very rare Pellar Sun Blade, and also the skeleton of a massive creature, perhaps that lived within the Tourmaline depths at some point, and there's even a secret passage leading to the lower city sewers called the Gloomy Ascent, where you can find Lorna Esthelion, an elf woman who is waiting for her date, who she describes as looking shockingly similar to Astarion. No doubt this passageway was used to lure victims directly into Cazador's dungeon, and although we don't have all the answers to the Szarr Palace, it remains as one of the places in Baldur's Gate 3 that has created the most questions and curiosity from players. And next up is probably one of the rarest hidden treasures in Baldur's Gate 3. Now in Act 3, there is a buried chest that does not trigger a survival check at all, so to find it, you literally would just need to spam using your shovel over and over, guessing where it might be. However, the chest has been found and is located right on the northeast side of Sorceress Sundries in a small grassy alley. The chest itself contains a few very rare items, including a scroll of eyebite, a scroll of seeming, an elixir of fire resistance, diluted oil of sharpness, and an oil of divination. And next up are 3 hidden spells that most players miss. These spells are Power Word Ruin, a level 9 transmutation spell which deals a total of 150 to 300 force damage by speaking a word of disaster into the Galarian Weave, calling forth 3 beams of pure destruction that each deal 50 to 100 force damage. There's also Form Sculpt Tressum, a level 9 transmutation spell which rearranges a creature's very being into the image of Gale's darling pet Tara, and Divine Revelry, a level 9 enchantment spell which conjures forth a barrel of Shadow Dark Ale from the yawning portal and spreads an irresistible dance across all nearby creatures. These incredibly powerful spells can only be acquired during a Gale Origin playthrough when you acquire the Annals of Karsus, confront Mystra at the Stormshore Tabernacle, and after defeating the Netherbrain, choose the correct dialogue option when facing Mystra. Then in the epilogue, you will return to Faerun as God Gale with these 3 spells available. And next up is a super unique fight you can find within the Act 3 graveyard in Baldur's Gate. By failing the deception roll with Bug Thimble after digging up a grave, you can find yourself in combat with Bug Thimble, but also 4 Kobold holes that have the condition Open Warrens. This causes a Kobold scout to emerge from the Kobold hole each turn. This fight is somewhat similar to the fight outside Balthazar's room in the Gauntlet of Szarr, where Dark Justiciars continue to spawn unless you destroy the Umbral Tremors, but you can disable these Kobold holes simply by standing on top of them or blocking them in some way, which gives them the condition Closed Warrens. It's a pretty cool, unique fight that most players probably haven't encountered, and you also get a cool sword after looting Bug Thimble's corpse called Kerwin's Cauterizer. And next up is a secret trader in Worm's Rock Fortress that most players miss. This trader will not trade with you unless you pass a dialogue check, and this trader's name is Arclea Oloril, the Flaming Fist Quartermaster. She insists that this is an armory, she says, and she's not a shopkeeper, and that these are for the Flaming Fist only. But passing the dialogue check will allow you to access the armory's goods, and while there isn't really any noteworthy equipment or weapons, they do have a very nice selection of arrows that will come in handy later on. Not only that, but by shopping here, you'll also be awarded with a point of inspiration and 340 XP for anyone in your party with a charlatan background, which Astarion has, which is called Nothing's Not for Sale. And next up are the secret messenger rats. 3 of these are super rare, hidden in an insanely obscure place, and are only there if you save the Night Song in Act 2. These secret messenger rats will actually convey clues to major quests in Act 3 for you if you have Speak with Animals on when you talk to them. One rat will say Gnomes in the Sea, hinting at the Gondian prisoners within the Iron Throne. Another rat will say the Blushing Mermaid stinks of some something fey, hinting at the presence of a green hag, and another will say there's been killings in a holy place, conveying news of Father Lorgan's murder. And the last one will say creeps in cloaks creeping in the sewers, hinting at the Baalist's hideout. And these three rats can be found in the basement of Jaheira's house, known as Elarathan's home, if the Night Song was spared in Act 2. And the fourth can be found down by the river, right beside the Baldur's Gate waypoint. And next up is how to have near infinite actions. Did you know that if you die and come back to life during your same turn from either Death Ward or similar effect, all of your actions are restored? So if you use a Potion of Speed, Elixir of Bloodlust, Action Surge, and even Martial Exertion, you'll have 4 actions, and if you have improved extra attack from being a level 11 fighter, which grants 2 extra attacks after attacking with your main hand weapon, that's a total of 12 attacks, and you can refresh all 12 during your turn by dying. Use the Gloves of Martial Exertion or the Ritual Dagger to deal damage to yourself to finish yourself off during your turn, or you can try to trigger opportunity attacks or just have a teammate bonk you on the head if all else fails. Of course, you'll need to make sure your character is very low health for this to work, so I usually down them and then just use help to get them sitting at a nice 1 health point, and then use this method and you can get your 12 attacks in, rinse and repeat for as many death wards as you have stacked with things like Blood of Lathander, Survival Instincts, or even the Ring After Death Do Us Part for near infinite actions. And it's important to mention this doesn't work unless you have at least one other party member who shares a turn with you, so you can switch back to your ally that was just resurrected. Otherwise, if you don't, when you die, you actually pass turn to your enemy, which will negate this entire trick. And next up is a hidden reward you can earn in the Elfsong Tavern, but only if you are a certain class. Now, Des Cremshaw in the Elfsong Tavern is a farmer who has run out of luck and is looking to find work for his family and himself. Now, most of the options lead nowhere that you can suggest to him, and the conversation doesn't end with any reward. But if your dialogue character is at least 1 level in Rogue, you'll have a special dialogue option recommending that his son join the Thieves Guild. And by choosing this dialogue option while having at least 1 party member with a criminal background, you'll be awarded with 440 XP and an inspiration point called Next Generation of Pockets. And next up is a hidden interaction with Laura and Vanra in a playthrough where you defeat the hag in Act 1. These two become victims in Act 3. Vanra is kidnapped and consumed by the green hag and is slowly becoming a hag herself. Laura is pleading with the Flaming Fist to investigate her disappearance, with no luck because the Flaming Fist appear to be under some sort of fey spell. However, if you never defeat the hag in Act 1, then Laura and Vanra's lives are totally different. If you enter their house, Vanra will say you look weird and even accuses you of being weird. Laura says you must not have any social graces, walking into people's homes uninvited, and asks you to find the door if you can manage. This is a totally different reaction to your presence than if her child was abducted by the green hag. And next up is a hidden interaction with Tara. Tara is Gale's pet Tressum. Now, if you're playing a Gale Origin playthrough, you'll encounter Tara in Act 1. Otherwise, you can find Tara in Act 3. But during a Gale Origin playthrough, if you pursue the Crown of Karsus and eventually ascend to godhood, during the prologue, you can actually get the option to shave Tara, turning her into a furless Tressum. Now, this interaction is so rare that out of the 3.3 million players killing the Netherbrain, only 2,000 players chose to shave Tara. Now, maybe there were a handful of players that had the option but chose not to, but even still, this ranks up there in terms of one of the rarest interactions in Baldur's Gate 3. And next up is the secret Panoply of Agony. Now, by obtaining all 13 different sources of damage, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, cold, fire, lightning, thunder, acid, poison, radiant, necrotic, force, and psychic, and then landing a killing blow with each of them during a Dark Urge playthrough, you will be awarded with the Panoply of Agony. This is an inspiration point. Now, to get this, I recommend buying scrolls for types of damage that you might not have readily available. Sorcerer's Sundries has a huge selection to pick up each damage type, and the Cranium Rats, or even the rats in the basement of the Elfsong Tavern, work great as target practice to easily pick up this awesome inspiration point because they have such low HP and it's very easy to get that killing blow during a Dark Urge playthrough. And next up is a secret note that you can receive from Mystic Carrion. To get this note, you'll need to pick up one of the jars that contain a body part of Mystic Carrion. Whether it's the heart, the liver, or the brain doesn't matter, only that you have at least one. Then go and slay Mystic Carrion. Then, after you long rest after slaying him, you'll awake to the jars missing, replaced with this note. Now, since the jars keep him immortal, you actually need to destroy them before slaying him, but since in this scenario the jars were kept intact, this leads to Mystic Carrion not truly dying and instead returning to life and leaving you this letter. Now, since most players who find the jars would know to destroy them, most probably don't ever discover this note that Mystic Carrion can leave, one that you only get by long resting after slaying him. And next up is the secret Curse of the Sired. This curse can only be applied to Astarion and can only be acquired if you enter into a conversation with Sebastian as Tav with Astarion in your party. Sebastian is one of Astarion's first victims and can be found in Cazador's dungeon. After letting Sebastian know he's been trapped for 170 years, he gets a bit upset. If you then just say, "We need to leave," Sebastian will break down and repeatedly says, "Damn you, Astarion," over and over, and actually places a very real curse upon Astarion called Curse of the Sired. This gives Astarion disadvantage on all saving throws. This curse can also be applied if you fail any of the rolls when talking to Sebastian in the same scenario. So most players probably miss ever seeing this curse get applied to Astarion. And it's also worth noting that you can just remove this curse with the Remove Curse spell. And next up is Ironhand's Boon. There are a number of amazing things unlocked by saving the Ironhand gnomes from Moonrise Towers. One of the main rewards is access to Angel Iron's cellar. If you don't save the gnomes in Act 2, the entrance to Angel Iron's cellar will be completely blocked off and everything inside sealed away. But if you save them, you get access to things like the Flash Blinder, a grenade that is guaranteed to stun Steelwatchers for 2 turns and will deactivate the Steelwatcher Titan's defensive bulwark condition, making this grenade incredible for taking on the Steelwatch. You can buy them off Bumpinagle inside of Angel Iron's cellar. He also sells a number of gloves. One of the most noteworthy is Martial Exertion gloves. These gloves grant Martial Exertion, granting an additional attack per turn, doubles your movement speed, and can be used once per short rest at the low cost of 66 piercing damage. But even if you're not interested in anything inside of Angel Iron's cellar, you'll still want to save the Ironhand gnomes in Act 2 because they'll save you at the South Span checkpoint. If you choose the option to submit and go to prison or fight after the Steelwatcher deems you a threat, an Ironhand gnome will throw a Flash Blinder grenade, giving you an opportunity to just run past the checkpoint. And if you didn't save them, you'd actually have a fight on your hands, or you'd actually be sent to prison. And next up is how to tame a Dilophosaurus. All you have to do is head to the Circus of the Last Days in Act 3, use Speak with Animals or drink a potion of animal speaking, and then speak to Crimson, the caged Dilophosaurus. Crimson appears to have been driven mad by hunger and requests you reach into the cage so that he can feast on your flesh. If you choose the dialogue option to feed the caged Dilophosaurus something else, not only will this make the Dilophosaurus non-hostile toward you, which is great, it will also award Outlander background inspiration, which both Karlach and Halsin have, called primary needs. Then, after the battle with the shapeshifters, you can talk to Crimson again, and he's very polite actually, after having that meal, and he explains that the shapeshifters starved him and taunted him, waving bloody rags in his face to drive him insane. It had actually made him lose his mind, but his real owners at the circus are his family, and he actually wants to stay with them even if you tried to release him. They actually rescued him as a youngling. It's actually a truly heartwarming story behind a very kind but misunderstood Dilophosaurus. And next up is the Stillmaker. This very rare dagger is very well hidden, so most players probably miss it. Underneath the open hand temple is a cavern, and within there you can find a strange hole if you pass a DC 5 perception check. That hole, once revealed, can be looted for this very rare dagger. You'll even get dialogue once it's looted, signaling that this was probably where Father Lorgan was slain. And next up is how to get Valeria to join you. Now, Investigator Valeria is a Hollyphant who can be first encountered in the open hand temple in Act 3. Valeria is investigating a series of murders happening in Baldur's Gate, and as you progress the quest, Valeria will eventually be kidnapped by cultists of Bhaal and can be found at the Murder Tribunal. There you can choose to sacrifice Valeria to Bhaal or rescue her. If rescued, she will join you in the final fight by offering the City Watch to aid you. This summons 3 City Watch Great Weapon Fighters. Now, compared to other allies, these are actually quite decent, but if you have an Eldritch Blast Sorlock in your party, I would highly recommend you sacrifice Valeria, since becoming an unholy assassin of Bhaal unlocks a trader that will sell you the Crater Flesh gloves, which are extremely powerful and much better than having Valeria join you. And next up is Omelem's Boon. This is certainly one of the most missed quest rewards in Baldur's Gate 3. In order to get Omelum's boon, you must resolve the quest, steal a Githyanki egg without Lady Esther receiving the Githyanki egg. Then, in Act 3, you will eventually encounter Omelum trapped within the Iron Throne. Omelum prompts the party to not be concerned with his fate and to save Duke Ravengard instead. However, it is possible to save both of them. If you help Omelum, he has an ability allowing him and one ally to instantly teleport to the submersible, so it's not as risky as it seems to save him. And if you do, you can return to the Society of Brilliance Lodge in Baldur's Gate to receive Omelum's boon. Now, Omelum tells the party that he sought to have the denizens of the Underdark come to your aid, but that he did not hold sway over them and instead offers you this boon. Omelum's boon is a simple bag fashioned from a single piece of rough burlap, and inside of it contains a handful of helpful consumables such as potions, scrolls, weapon oil, and a fungal bamboozler. And next up is an amazing hidden interaction with Bug Thimble. If you dig up a certain grave within the lower city graveyard, Bug Thimble will appear claiming it's his. If you use deception on him and say it's your father's grave, you can get inspiration for anyone in your party that's a charlatan, which includes Astarion. However, there is a Dark Urge specific choice that lets you question whether you've ever buried anyone alive before. If you click it, you'll end up losing yourself to your urge, and you will hear the sounds of you stuffing Bug Thimble into the casket, breaking some bones in the process, and then burying him alive. The dialogue ends with Bug Thimble crying for help beneath a dirt mound, and then the mound can no longer be interacted with. And next up is Nina's Profane Ritual. Within the Baldur's Gate graveyard in the lower city, a child named Nina is attempting to resurrect her dead brother. Calling out to Merkel, she isn't quite getting it right. However, if you choose the right dialogue options, you can help Nina succeed in her ritual. Doing so will award both Acolyte and Urchin backgrounds with an inspiration point, and also quite a bit of XP. It also will award you with a fight against a bunch of undead, so be prepared if you're going to help Nina reanimate the dead. And next up is how to get Kithrak Voss to join you. This is one of the most powerful allies you can get, offering you the Kithraki Inferno ability. This allows you to command the Red Dragon of Supreme Kithrak Voss to breathe a wall of fire onto the battlefield, dealing 12d6 fire damage instantly to any enemy who's in the area, and another 12d6 fire damage to anyone who starts their turn in it. It is essentially a more powerful and larger wall of fire. However, unlike many of the allies' abilities, this can only be used once, so make sure to make it count. And funny enough, even though you'd think it's Kadenos breathing this fire, you can actually use this ability within the upper city sewers where no red dragon would be able to get inside. And next up is how to get Bhaal to join you. This is one of the best bonuses you can have during the final fight, which grants your entire party a passive critical hit chance increase by reducing the requirement by 2. Like other increases, it also stacks with other critical hit chance improvements. It also grants your entire party a new ability called Stunning Gaze. This costs just a bonus action and has a chance to cause the target to be stunned for 1 turn. Most bonus actions aren't nearly as strong as this, and you can use this as many times as you'd like, which makes this an incredibly strong bonus to have for your entire party. And to get Bhaal to join you, spoiler alert, you must defeat Orin and choose to become Bhaal's chosen during a Dark Origin playthrough. Certainly a compelling reason to embrace your birthright. And next up is how to get Maul to join you. First encountered in the Emerald Grove, Maul is the leader of a gang of refugee children, and her bonus in the final fight is actually quite great. It's a passive bonus which allows all party members to cast Rays of Fire, which deals 3d6 fire damage at the cost of an action, and all party members take 5 less fire damage passively, in addition to being granted plus 1d4 to charisma checks and saving throws. The reduced fire damage is great since you will encounter a red dragon atop the Netherbrain, and to get Maul's help, you'll need to save the tieflings in Act 1, and then in Act 3, find Maul in the guild hall after stealing her contract with Raphael. Now, to steal the contract, you'll have to head to the House of Hope, and if you killed Raphael, you need to make sure not to mention it to Maul, and you'll also need to pass a persuasion check. But if you're a warlock, you'll have a warlock specific dialogue choice instead of the skill check. And with the nice passive bonuses, it's totally worth talking to Maul before facing the final fight. And next up is how to get Ulma to join you. Ulma is the leader of the Gur monster hunters. She can be first encountered in the Gur camp in Rivington in Act 3. Upon encountering them, you'll learn that their children have been kidnapped by Khazador's spawn, and they are seeking your help to rescue them and defeat Khazador. Once you defeat Khazador, Ulma will appear as you begin begin to exit the dungeon. If you stop the ritual, she will offer her assistance in the final battle as thanks for putting an end to Cazador. However, if you completed the ritual for Astarion, Ulma will attack you and of course won't be there to help you in the final fight. It's also important to note that depending on your relationship with Astarion, if you don't help him ascend through the ritual, he can leave your party permanently and take all the loot he's wearing with him. Although, quite honestly, Ascended Astarion is so powerful I'd never recommend not ascending him for the sake of getting Ulma to join you, other than for role-playing reasons. And next up is the extremely rare Red Dragonborn in the lower city sewers. This Dragonborn is known as the Master of Flames and the Splitter of Skies and will only appear if Voss is alive and the quest The Githyanki Warrior is in progress. This Dragonborn is none other than Cadenos, the Red Dragon, and is in fact not a Dragonborn. Voss and Cadenos are there waiting to receive word on whether or not you've secured the Orphic Hammer in order to free Orpheus so that they may defeat Vlaakith. And although Cadenos only has a few lines, it is pretty amazing that the very same Red Dragon that you encountered in Act 1 can be encountered again and talked with in Act 3. And next up is how to get Isabel to join you. Isabel grants a powerful spell called Balm of the Moon Maiden, which heals 14 to 84 health on up to 6 nearby allies. So 6 times 14 to 84, it's a ton of healing. This powerful heal can be a real lifesaver and it's totally worth getting since it's actually not too difficult to get Isabel to join you. All you have to do is complete the quest Resolve the Abduction in Act 2 within Last Light Inn without Isabel dying. Then in Act 2, Dame Aylin must be spared by Shadowheart, which will cause Aylin and Isabel to join your camp. Finally in Act 3, complete the quest Find the Night Song by bringing the Night Song to Ramazith's tower and siding with her to defeat Lorroakan. Then just talk to Dame Aylin and Isabel in your camp afterwards and they will join you in the final fight. And next up is the hidden Act 3 Spectator. Now there are 2 spectators in Act 1, one in the Underdark and one inside the Iron Flask, but did you know there's one in Act 3? Now in order to see this spectator, you need to deliver the shipment to the Zhentarim in Act 1 unopened. Then in Act 3, you can actually find that very same shipment in the possession of Slick Inatra in the Guild Hall. She wanders around quite a bit, but you can pickpocket it off her or loot it from her corpse, and inside the chest you will find that very same Iron Flask. Just like in Act 1, this Iron Flask can be thrown or opened to release a spectator, so if you missed it in Act 1, you can still get it in Act 3. And next up is how to get Viconia to join you. Viconia Devere is a drow cleric of Szarr. She's also a character that was in both Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Shadows of Amun, where she was a companion. In Baldur's Gate 3, she is known as Mother Superior and tasked Shadowheart to retrieve the artifact. Upon entering the House of Grief, Viconia will demand you turn over Shadowheart to her, and doing this will of course permanently remove Shadowheart from your party, but you will gain Viconia's support in the final fight in the form of Nightbringer's Shadow Adepts. However, you can only choose to give up Shadowheart if Dame Aylin was spared during the quest Find the Night Song. If Shadowheart instead becomes a Dark Justiciar, then you can help Shadowheart overthrow Viconia instead to become the leader of the Sharran Cloister, and you'll get the very same Shadow Adepts that siding with Viconia would have granted you. And next up is a secret interaction with Power Word Kill. This ability compels your target to instantly die. You can also keep the spell permanently if you cast it on yourself and then another target at the same time through Sorcerer's Twinned Spell or through a Wizard's Split Enchantment. However, what if you also had Death Ward, the Blood of Lathander, and Survival Instincts to allow yourself to come back to life instantly after using the spell, which would also give you your actions back? Would you be able to use Power Word Kill over and over within a single turn to defeat all of your enemies? Now I put it to the test and I learned very quickly that Power Word Kill does not mess around. The spell does not care if you have Survival Instincts, Death Ward, or the Blood of Lathander. You just die no matter what. So while this infinite combo doesn't work, it's also good to know that Power Word Kill goes through any effect that would otherwise keep you alive. Although Globe of Invulnerability does keep a target alive from Power Word Kill, other than that, the spell is actually quite effective. And next up is an update to the reward for saving Oscar Favras in Patch 7, one of the most annoying quests in Baldur's Gate 3. By saving Oscar Favras in Act 1 from the Zhentarim, you can then later save him again in Lady Janeth's estate. Oscar will finally paint you a portrait when you do so. However, now in Patch 7, it will now be a portrait of the character who initiated dialogue with Oscar to claim the reward. This means you can get a portrait of any character you want, any companion you want. And while the portrait portrait is the same art as the party view on the left of your screen, it is still cool that you can now get a portrait of any companion you'd like instead of it always being your Tav. And next up is a hidden change nowhere listed in the patch 7 notes. The feat Savage Attacker is now applying to Sneak Attack. Savage Attacker grants your melee damage rolls to roll 2 dice and use the higher of the 2 rolls. This also applies to certain damage riders like the fire damage from Flawed Helldusk Gloves, which is awesome, and this can make you deal 20 to 40% more damage depending on the range of damage that you can deal. And Sneak Attack is a rogue weapon action that allows you to deal extra damage to a foe that you have advantage against, or if you have an ally within 5 feet of your target and you don't have disadvantage yourself. Sneak Attack is very powerful, and with Savage Attacker now re-rolling the damage dice, this is a secret buff that can make Rogue a much more powerful class in patch 7. And next up is how to deal double damage simply by playing a character with a certain appearance. Now, the small female body type for some reason causes Shadow Strike to strike twice, leading to double damage as long as you are not wielding a weapon in your offhand. This means that a companion like Shadowheart, when playing as a Way of the Shadow monk using Shadow Strike, will consistently deal double damage. I tested it, and characters like Gale do not get this strange second double attack when all things are equal. So if you love playing a Way of Shadow monk, which is actually very fun to play, definitely make sure to play with a small female body type to double your damage with Shadow Strike. And next up is how to dual wield without the feat. To do this, have one character with a shield in their offhand and one of the weapons you want to dual wield in the other. Then drag the shield onto the offhand of the weapon you want to dual wield on, and it will actually equip the main hand onto the offhand of the character you want to dual wield with. Then just drag your main hand to swap with your offhand and repeat the same exact process again, dragging the shield over to the offhand of the character you want to dual wield with. Then you've got your character dual wielding when they shouldn't actually be able to, freeing you up to choose a different feat. And next up is a hidden tombstone within the Act 3 graveyard. Near the entrance to the Grand Mausoleum, there is a tombstone that can be interacted with, which the narrator will then read. One in particular is rather interesting. It reads, "Aradin the Elder, open the bloody gates." It seems that Aradin's bloodline seems to keep running into the same situation where they're yelling for gates to be opened. Now, as we saw during the first attack on the Emerald Grove, where Aradin the Younger yells to open the bloody gates, it seems like this is a trend. Now, since this tomb is marked Aradin the Elder, we can only assume that this is Aradin's father or perhaps grandfather, and perhaps even perished for the gates not being opened in a time. And next up is how to instantly slay any target. By casting Dominate Person on an enemy to turn them into an ally, followed up by Polymorph and Gaseous Form, you can attack them with nearly any attack and they will die instantly because they only have 3 health points. Now, usually when a Polymorph target gets attacked, they will return to their normal form, but when turned into a gaseous form from Polymorph, instead they will die instantly. Now, because all 3 of these spells require concentration, you will need 2 party members to work together to pull this off. The first party member must use Dominate Person, the second uses Polymorph, and then the first then uses Gaseous Form. Now, upon casting the third spell, combat with a 3 health point cloud will begin, but that will end very shortly after for a very easy way to cheese most boss fights. And next up is a secret interaction with Dolor Amaris. This dagger adds +7 damage to your critical hits, but what it doesn't mention is that it also applies to your ranged critical hits too. Not only that, but it also applies to your other damaging sources such as the 2d6 force granted from Crater Flesh Gloves on crit, granting even more damage to that. This makes this dagger unbelievably powerful, especially on an assassin which has guaranteed critical strikes against surprised enemies. Combine this with an arrow of many targets against a group of surprised enemies, and the amount of damage added by this dagger is multiplied, making it insanely OP. Not only that, but you can also dual wield Dolor Amaris. One of these weapons can be found on the corpse of Dolor, the wannabe Bhaal assassin, and the other can be purchased from the Echo of Abazigal. This traitor is unlocked by passing the trial of the Bhaal Murder Tribunal and becoming an unholy assassin of Bhaal. And next up is playing Sunni. Right as you enter the Blushing Mermaid in Act 3, you can find Siggy and Sven talking. They're talking about Sven's Sven's plans, and if you succeed a wisdom insight check, you can discover that Siggy is in love with Sven. By succeeding a persuasion check to convince Sven to listen to Siggy because she loves him, he will stay with Siggy and you'll be rewarded with an inspiration point for anyone in your party with an entertainer background. The name of the inspiration is Playing Suni, and Suni is the goddess of beauty and passion in the Faerunian pantheon, referencing the saying, in my opinion, to playing Cupid. And next up is a secret item that most players miss, and that item is Wulbren's Head. This item is extremely rare because the only way to get it is to save Wulbren from Moonrise Tower's prison in Act 2, and then later in Act 3 when you encounter Fist Manip Falcow just inside the gate at the Southspan checkpoint, you have to accept his quest to destroy the Ironhand gnomes. Now chances are if you saved them in Act 2, you aren't going to go slaughter them in Act 3, but if you do, you will be able to loot Wulbren's Head and bring it to Fist Manip Falco, and he will reward you with 800 gold for it, and it will also grant you inspiration if you have a soldier background, which Lae'zel has. Also, Manip is supposedly a human when inspected, but he visibly has elf ears, which is kind of suspicious. And next up is how to get Macabre Enigma. This reward is one that probably 99% of players did not achieve. To get it, you'll need to find each part of Dribble's body. You can find Dribble's hand on a plate in Popper's store inside the Circus of the Last Days. Dribble's torso could be found on the dead body of Penella Lumpensix under the Open Hand Temple. Dribble's arm is in the Pear Tree House basement southeast of Sorcerer's Sundries on the corpse of courageous little Kimabeth. Dribble's leg is in Lavernica's basement southwest of the lower city central wall waypoint. It can be found on the corpse of Incontinentia Friggin in the cave. Dribble's foot is in the basement of Rainforest's home located southeast of the Blushing Mermaid Tavern. In the basement, the foot can be looted from the corpse of a blue dragonborn named Winslow Reginald. Dribble's pelvis can be looted off the body of Gohamberry Tresp in the empty house northwest of the Basilisk Gate, just behind the Stormshore Tabernacle. And last, Dribble's head can be looted from the corpse of Wilting Alex, found just north of the Temple of Bhaal waypoint. Now, upon picking up the last piece of Dribble's, you will immediately earn Macabre Enigma, an inspiration point if you have the Guild Artisan background. And not only that, but you can also return all Dribble's parts to Lucretius for the Spellmite gloves, and the circus will go away after the next long rest. So make sure to get everything there is to earn there before you turn this quest in, and you'll also get inspiration called the Dismemberment of Dribbles if you have an Acolyte background, which Shadowheart has, inspiration called Macabre Hunt if you have an Outlander background, which Karlach has, and inspiration called Trail of Blood if you are playing as the Dark Urge. And next up is a secret interaction with Shadow Whiskers. Found within the Circus of the Last Days, Shadow Whiskers will attack if you interact with fake Dribbles. If you enter dialogue with Shadow Whiskers, you can discern either through animal handling or if you have Speak with Animals on and talk to Shadow Whiskers, that Shadow Whiskers is filled with hatred and will attack at the first opportunity. By passing the investigation check, you can learn that the lock is old and that you could break it, trapping Shadow Whiskers inside. If you do, then when you interact with fake Dribbles, the shapeshifters won't be able to release Shadow Whiskers upon you, giving you one less enemy to fight. And next up is the secret multi-pass. Behind the post office counter in Rivington is a letter called Urgent Report for Duke Ravengard, priority entry. If you steal this letter, it unlocks the dialogue option to tell the Flaming Fist at the Southspan checkpoint that you have an urgent message. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the gauntlet appears to not care at all whatsoever, and you still need to be scanned by the Steelwatcher, leading to the same consent to arrest or attack options. So while the letter doesn't actually get you through the checkpoint, it does actually strangely award you inspiration if you have a noble background, which Minthara has. And next up is a secret reward you can earn within the Elf Song Tavern. Within the tavern, there's actually a comedy contest going on called the Laugh Riot. There are actually some decently funny jokes that appear as dialogue options if you choose to participate, including the intimidation options, which are funny. But if you choose a couple of the funnier lines, you can actually win the comedy contest and get awarded with an inspiration called a Stand-Up Adventurer if you have an entertainer background. And next up is a new trader trick that works for Patch 7 Hotfix 28. Larian thought they fixed the Pact of the Blade Warlock packed weapon trader trick, but really all they did was stop us from using the wares method. You can still get your packed weapon into the barter menu by simply putting another weapon in there first, then dragging that weapon onto your currently equipped packed weapon, and like that, the packed weapon will be placed into the barter menu, swapping places. And like the old method, you can just click barter and balance over and over to take the value of your weapon from the trader without ever losing your gold. And on console, you can probably just try to equip the weapon in the barter menu, and that should swap the packed blade into barter for you. And really the best part about this trick is that you can change your class and still keep the packed weapon. As you can see, I changed my class to paladin, but the packed weapon condition is still applied to my weapon. This means that you now have a permanent method to steal traders' goods as you progress through your playthrough. Not only that though, because a packed weapon is actually an incredible bonus in itself. Not only being able to not be disarmed or drop your weapon, it also uses your charisma modifier instead of strength or dexterity, which can be an excellent bonus to carry onto whatever class you change into next. So out of all the trader tricks, this may be not only one of the most convenient, but could also be one of the best for certain builds. And next up is the hidden treasure within the Western Beach. This area is one that most players probably didn't bother exploring, as it's just a random dirt path that leads there. However, if you bypass all the traps and the fight between the guild and the Stone Lord's followers, you can actually find a bunch of valuable items. As you head towards the ship that was at Moonrise Towers, you can find a Mind Flayer tadpole specimen, and then on the ship's storage itself, you can find 2 more additional Mind Flayer tadpoles, leading to 3 total new Mind Flayer powers. Then there's a secret passageway resembling a cave, and at the end of it, there's a bunch of treasure, including the Bone Spike boots. These are great for any class that doesn't wear armor, like a monk or a barbarian, and it grants +1 to AC and saving throws while not wearing armor, and it also grants brutal leap, which causes 2 turns of prone to the target, and the boots also increase your jump distance by 5 feet. Not bad at all. And next up is a secret magical token that is hidden within the Durinbald Mausoleum. Now within the graveyard of Act 3, you can find a coin called the Feather Token on a skeleton within the Durinbald Mausoleum. The description of this token appears to break the 4th wall, stating, if you fall while carrying this token, you take no falling damage. The token's magic is expended after you land, whereupon the disc becomes non-magical. Now the mentioning on the coin literally saying falling damage is definitely one thing that makes this coin unique, but it also makes you wonder if it actually prevents falling damage. I tested it, it does not. So if it ever was magical, it's gone, or maybe that's the joke. It was never magical, and that's why a skeleton's holding it, because he thought it was. It then has another description that says, a small faded feather is stamped on one side of this surprisingly light coin. And even though the coin itself has no value to be sold to traders, it's certainly something that most players miss and is rather interesting. And next up are 2 unusual and unique hidden containers you can find in Act 3. Containers are great for keeping organized, and these 2 are especially good at this because of their unique appearance. The first is called Old Pouch and can be found on the roof of Jaheira's house. Inside you can find a harper pin, which can come in handy for opening up the basement of her house, and a note she wrote. You can also find some nice potions if you pass a perception check, and there's even a charming little egg you can find in a bird's nest. The egg's description is even more charming. The writer apparently had a cheerful day pondering the word egg. And then the second container can be found within a coffin inside of Kindle Hollow's tombstones, and while you might expect it to look like some type of animal in the tooltip, it appears to just be some bones. And next up is the Winkling Gloves. These gloves grant +1 to sleight of hand and +1 to attack rolls. These are actually quite great for your sleight of hand character to use when it's time to open a locked door or to pickpocket. Now to get these, you'll actually need to take them off of none other than Xander Tubin. Now most players probably didn't murder a captive blind Gondian, making these gloves a pair that most players probably miss. Now since Tanner Zubin can join you in the final fight and create you a Steelwatcher, it's best to keep him alive. So if you really wanted these, the best method is to turn on non-lethal attacks and melee him unconscious to loot these from him. Now don't worry, coming back to Xander after a long rest, we'll have him right where you left off, so you can still get that Steelwatcher ally if that's what you're after. And next up are secret genie treasures that most players miss, and most players might even call it junk, but these are actually pretty amazing or simply interesting. Now in order to earn these treasures, you need to spin Akabi's wheel. It's 500 gold, and you have a chance to get one of 16 different items. One item that most players probably overlook is the Gem of Restitution. This gem, when sold, will return to its owner's pocket. Now this is very useful were it not for the fact that it is the circus genie who owns it. Well, don't let that stop you. You can actually just have your sleight of hand character sit next to Akabi, ready to receive the gem, take it from his pocket after you sell it. Now unfortunately it is not instantaneous, and the gem needs some time to sort of waddle back over to its owner, only returning to Akabi's pockets after a long rest. But still, the gem actually does what it says it does, so that is really cool. The Comeback Hand Axe is another item that surprisingly works as described. This loyal axe always returns to its owner after being thrown. However, it has no eyes and therefore dreadful aim, inevitably returning to its thrower blade end first. Now it's pretty hilarious seeing seeing the weapon get thrown normally, but then it kind of just floats back over to you and very deliberately just smashes directly on your head. And like it clearly has great aim as it consistently comes back and smashes you right in the head. Now, it's not very practical as far as I can tell, other than for some laughs. I think the boots of very fast blinking are probably more well known, allowing you to misty step, but you leave behind your clothes. Also not very practical other than for laughs. The eternal carafe of wine, or sometimes acid, can actually be pretty useful. When it's acid, that becomes a reliable way to get hit for 1d4 acid damage, whether you want to lower your health for certain conditions such as Leviatar's Love, which grants +2 bonus to attack rolls and wisdom saving throws when at 30% HP or less, or equipment like the Cap of Wrath, which grants Wrath when below 50% HP, the Blooded Great Axe, which grants 1d4 extra slashing damage when below 50% HP. There's also the Spurred Band, which is a ring which grants momentum when at 50% or less HP. There's the Helmet of Grit, which causes you to not provoke opportunity attacks when at 50% or less HP, and so on. There's quite a few items, and there were even more in early access, but those items got removed, and I think the best is certainly being the Helmet of Grit, giving you that bonus action, and the Blooded Great Axe, giving you that extra 1d4 slashing damage. You can also use the Carafe to lower your health if you want to do the near infinite actions trick, where you return to life after dying with all your actions back, so that also could be a use for this otherwise seemingly useless item. There's also the Reverse Rain Cloak, which grants wet permanently. This gives you resistance to fire and immunity to burning at the cost of being vulnerable to cold and lightning. This could be useful on a character with unstable blood, which causes your blood to become explosive, turning into a fire surface and causing burning for 3 turns. In this case, the cloak would prevent the downside and you get all the upside. You can also find the Staff of a Mumbling Wizard off of Akabi. The staff grants a cantrip called Firebolt ? Firebolt, which has a 1 in 20 chance to actually shoot a fireball instead of a firebolt. This is actually pretty amazing since it's a cantrip. Now, previously this cantrip was bugged and had a 100% chance to hit, which is awesome, but now it actually does use your normal spell attack roll. Also, unlike a normal firebolt cantrip, this firebolt will always deal 1d10 fire damage, which means it's not going to scale up with your level, which is another reason you've probably never heard of the staff. It's really not that great, especially since it's found in Act 3, where there are a lot of other better options. And there's admittedly a bunch of totally useless junk you can also win, the worst offender being the expired pass to Sharess's Caress, but I did save the best for last. There is one item that is actually the best in slot piece of equipment for a sleight of hand character. These are the Unlucky Thief's Gloves. These gloves grant the highest amount of bonus skill to sleight of hand at +2 out of any gloves in the game, and they can only be found by chance. Play Spin the Wheel, don't steal his ring so that you lose, and then when you lose, you randomly get this as a consolation prize. It could take you a lot of gold. Each spin costs 500 gold, and so this is one reason that a lot of players probably haven't seen all of the consolation prizes, since you have to spend so much gold in order to get them. And you even get some hidden dialogue. After getting all 16 consolation prizes, the genie will say that Spin the Wheel is closed and you can no longer spin it. So make sure to get Nirulna somewhere before you get that last bonus consolation prize. And next up is the Steelwatcher Helmet. This is a helmet most players probably miss because it is simply sitting on a table in the corner of the first floor of the Steelwatch Foundry and can be easily mistaken for just being a doodad or some form of set dressing. However, this helm is actually a rare helm that allows you to see in the dark up to 40 feet and makes you immune to blind. Tanner Zubin should definitely put this on, and it also gives advantage on Constitution saving throws. However, the most interesting part of this helmet is actually the flavor text, which reads, "When I found Carixim, he turned to me, and with all those poor people's souls crammed into him, and he grinned at me. He said, 'I've been expecting you, boy.' Overheard from the smith, Damon." So a little bit of lore about Damon and Carixim. And next up is the Dancing Breeze. This is the only weapon in the entire game that is a finesse glaive. That means it can be used with Rogue's Sneak Attack, and Sneak Attack also now works with the Savage Attacker feat as of patch 7, allowing you to reroll damage die and keep the higher result. And if that wasn't enough, the glaive is two-handed, meaning you can get bonus damage from Great Weapon Master. Now, on top of all of that, the very rare weapon also has a special weapon action called Whirlwind Attack, which strikes every target around you, which means that the Dancing Breeze is one weapon that not only do most players miss, it's also one that was sneakily made much better as of patch 7. And to get the Dancing Breeze, you'll need to head to Rivington General in Act 3 and talk to ex-Vic Yap, and she will sell you this glaive. And next up is a hidden weapon sold by a secret trader. This weapon and its abilities are a reference to a character in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders, named Alessi. Alessi has an axe and possesses a spirit named Sethin that similarly wields an axe and has the power to reverse age, reducing targets into young children. The name and effects match the weapon Sethin perfectly. It has a unique spell called Sethin Spiritual Great Axe, which creates a spiritual twin of the weapon, similar to the spell Spiritual Weapon. It also has the spell Sethin Reduce. To get this, you'll need to either have Shadowheart not in your party, or have had her become a Dark Justiciar before talking to Ferg Droger, then passing a persuasion check to see his additional wares, where Sethin will then be available for purchase. And next up is the Amulet of the Drunkard. This rare amulet actually heals you when you become drunk. However, the description says you get healed each turn while you're drunk, and that your drunkenness is extended by 5 rounds. And while the extension to the drunkenness is true, the other part is false. You only get healed upon the initial round of becoming drunk, and you can't drink additional beverages to get healed again until the condition wears off first. So this amulet unfortunately is not great. However, it is hidden because it can only be purchased from Hoots Hooligan if you first drink her new brew. You need to agree to drink her new brew by accepting a free sample of it, and then afterwards you'll be able to purchase the Amulet of the Drunkard. And next up is the Ring of Truthfulness. This ring is hidden beneath the windmill in Rivington in Act 3 on the finger of a Mind Flayer. This Mind Flayer is sleeping and is a newborn. Now there are 2 choices you can go down when encountering this Mind Flayer. You can help it since it's starving, which will award you with a Mind Flayer Tadpole power, or you can slay it on the spot and consume its brain, which also results in a Mind Flayer Tadpole power. Since the rewards are exactly the same, slaying the Mind Flayer is actually the better idea because not only is it quicker and easier, you'll also end up getting this ring. The Ring of Truthfulness grants advantage on insight checks, which is helpful for certain dialogue situations where insight can help you determine what's really going on, but it's more so just a ring that most players probably miss. And next up is how to keep Divine Intervention permanently. If you are playing as a cleric and reach level 10, you learn this class action which allows you to call upon your deity in your moment of greatest need. Once they interfere, your deity will never do so in this manner again. Or will they? The tooltip even says the caster can only use this feature once in their adventure. However, like how you can keep Power Word Kill to use over and over, you can actually keep this one-time use spell simply by dying when casting it. To do this, you'll need to use the Sunder the Heretical option, call upon your deity to bring forth a Radiant Cataclysm upon all nearby enemies. This ability deals 8d10 radiant damage to all enemies in a 50-foot or 15-meter radius. Targets can succeed on a Wisdom saving throw to take half damage. This option is great if you're up against a large number of enemies to really get maximum value, but it can be used to kill our cleric if used on a target with Radiant Retort, such as Viconia Devere. This is actually somewhat useful, allowing your cleric to cast Sunder the Heretical over and over, dying with each cast to deal a bunch of AoE damage. Unfortunately, since the only option of the 4 from Divine Intervention that can possibly kill you is Sunder the Heretical, that means we can't use Opulent Revival, Arm Thy Servant, or Golden Generosity an infinite number of times like we can with Sunder the Heretical. Now, if you aren't familiar, when using Divine Intervention, you have 4 options other than Sunder the Heretical, which we just talked about. There's Opulent Revival, Resurrect fallen companions with half their hit points and restore all nearby allies as if they had long rested. This ability applies to allies within a 60-foot radius and is really great if you're in a close encounter where multiple party members have fallen and you really need to swing the battle in your favor. Arm Thy Servant calls upon your deity to grant you a legendary weapon forged in the fires of your holy bond. This ability creates a legendary mace in the cleric's inventory and immediately equips it. This mace is called the Devotee's Mace and does not go away even if you change your class. You can even sell it, so if you wanted to, you could change each companion to a cleric, use Divine Intervention, Arm Thy Servant to create the mace, and then sell them all to generate gold. And then last, there is Golden Generosity. Call upon your deity to provide you with a rich bounty of potions and camp supplies. This ability spawns a chest called Bestowed Bounty on the ground next to the cleric, containing camp supplies, superior or supreme healing potions, and 7 or 6 elixirs. If you change your class, the Bestowed Bounty chest will vanish, but any items that were inside will drop on the ground. Now, very interestingly, the items generated in the Bestowed Bounty are tied to each save. So the first cast of Bestowed Bounty on a save or a code will always give the same items, and the second will give a different set, and so on, which really makes me wonder what is inside the final set of Bestowed Bounty if you make every single playable character use Divine Intervention, Golden Generosity, since they're sort of hard-coded to be the same for each one. And next up is a Secret Therapy Pig. This pig can be found within the Donations Barn of Act 3 and can be spoken to if you have the Speak with with animal's condition. Upon speaking to this pig, you can learn that the pig believes that he was donated, presumably, for a emotional support role. A therapy pig, if you will. The pig continues by saying that this is the reason why he is kept so well fed. They want him performing at his tip top. Of course, this naive pig doesn't realize the real reason he's kept well fed, although it is possible he will serve an emotional support role once he's taken his final form, so to speak. This pig is also potentially allegorical to Lae'zel in her belief that the ascension that Vlaakith promises is to be revered, but instead ends up with her being consumed. Now, there's also a pig named Lulabell in Divinity Original Sin 2 that is dearly loved that this could be alluding to. However, if you try walking in the barn, you can eventually be given a deception dialogue option where you can say, to be honest, you're hot on the trail of your client's prize pig, Lulabell. If you succeed the role, there are even 2 more dialogue options talking about Lulabell. Lulabell's been stolen. I've been told to check every barn in the city, no exceptions, and I'm sorry, but if I tell you more, I could be putting Lulabell's life in danger. She has piglets depending on her. So that confirms the Lulabell reference theory. This pig in the donations barn definitely is a reference back to Divinity Original Sin 2, especially with those dialogue options confirming it. Very, very cool. And next up is the secret second silver sword of the astral plane, a sister secret second silver sword of the astral plane, if you will. We all know that the silver sword of the astral plane that Voss carries in Act 1 can be disarmed from him and looted, but did you know that there's a second silver sword of the astral plane that you can acquire? If obtained in Act 1, you are unable to be gifted this weapon as a quest reward later in Act 3, but Voss is still holding one and it can be looted from his corpse if you kill him in Act 3. Now, this does require that you agree to help him during a long rest in Act 2 after entering the astral prism in the Githyanki Kresh. And now, since there are quite a few requirements in order to get this second silver sword of the astral plane, it's probably really rare that any player actually acquired 2 of them in a single playthrough, but it is possible. So the earliest you can find Voss in Act 3 is Sharess's Caress. You can slay him there, but you can also find him later on in the lower city sewers and in the upper city if he's still alive and you've completed the prerequisites for him to appear in those places. And if you do end up acquiring a second silver sword of the astral plane, then you're probably one of a very few people to do so. And next up is a possible Easter egg with Hollow's staff. Now, the staff looks pretty cool and even grants disadvantage on saving throws against your necromancy spells, which could be very good in patch 8. However, the name of this staff may actually be a reference to the necromancer Lucretia Hollow, an NPC character from the D&D stream Exandria Unlimited Calamity. We can come to this conclusion because of the NPC's name, which is Lucretius, very similar to Lucretia, and the name of the staff, Hollow's staff, both point towards this reference. And since Lucretius is a quest giver and likely isn't murdered for her staff, it's probably a reference most players miss. However, if you read the staff's flavor text, you can learn that the staff belongs to Thibault Hollow. And if you read the Staff of Cherished Necromancy's flavor text, you can learn that Thibault was the father of Cherish. Now, Cherish Hollow wrote the book within Lucretius's tent, The Amiable Art of Necromancy, which sort of paints this picture that the Hollow family was a family of necromancers and begs the question, how did Lucretius acquire Hollow's staff? And next up, there's a funny hidden note titled Note from Business Lord Popper, in all caps, that can be found within the Circus of the Last Days within a chest buried beside the tent where Dribbles is performing. The note reads in Dribbles' silly English, "Hi Ratty, sorry for killings you, but Popper wanted the tasty hand you found. Lots love, Popper." You can also find the rat he killed within the chest, and when you try to loot the hand near Popper, he'll even admit that he had to fight a rat for the hand, and although it appears that having found the note doesn't unlock any additional dialogue, it's probably a chest most players miss. And next up is a secret bonus that isn't listed on a very rare piece of equipment. The rarely found Ring of Feywild Sparks actually has a hidden bonus on it. The ring reads, while your sorceress Tides of Chaos feature is active, you will always trigger Wild Magic Surge when casting spells. And that's all the ring says. So you might think it's useless for anyone who is not a wild magic sorcerer. However, it actually also secretly increases your spell save DC by 1. By testing casting a spell that requires a save and having your target succeed that saving throw, you can actually see that the ring is adding +1 to spell save DC. You can also compare your chance of success with said spell by equipping and unequipping the ring and seeing your chance of of success go up and down respectively. It would be nice if the ring actually listed this, but now you know, and this ring can probably actually start being used in some caster builds. And next up is secret dialogue that most players missed when using a hidden method to sneak into Worm's Rock. Now to activate this, all you need to do is head to Sharess's Caress and talk to the bartender. She'll talk about her new drink that packs a punch, and if you choose the dialogue option that you want to try the drink, you'll get a free sample. Then you'll need to drink Hoots Hooch until you get the condition Blackout, which has about a 10% chance of happening, so you might need to drink quite a few, and she only stocks 3, so there's a pretty good chance that most players didn't get the Blackout condition on their first round of drinks. On top of that, you also need to have not already explored Worm's Rock. But if you meet both of these conditions, then the next thing you know, you'll be inside of Worm's Rock prison, and Fist Ivorist will approach you and tell you that you're going to be locked up for a very long time for what you did while you were drunk. This is super rare dialogue that most players probably missed, since all those conditions had to be just perfect in order to get it.